Hello, everyone. My name is Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience. And today, I wanted to talk about something that hits pretty close to home, at least for me. Amazon's Alexa, along with the other sort of like electronic assistant platforms like Google Home and Siri and so on. And it's a pretty light topic, to be honest. Maybe preferable given the international state of affairs, but it's something that I've realized I've never really discussed with other families I know who have these devices in their homes. And I'd be interested in, what any of you might be willing to share regarding your own behaviors and relationships with these devices. And, just how you think about these human technology pseudo-social relationships. But okay, so to begin, here's the paper. This is a study that's basically a follow-up of an earlier study, which was more focused on just getting a sense of how people tend to interact with these devices specifically in their homes. And this more recent study is a paper that's a collaboration between groups at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Cornell University, as well as a member of the Jibo device team. More on that later. And the paper focuses on voice user interfaces, meaning devices, again, like Amazon Alexa. And they basically did 3 studies in this paper involving 34 families with 92 people between the ages of 4 years old and 69 years old. So a bit of an age range. And so they did the following 3 studies. The first was just to get a sense of how it is that people tend to interact with these, specific commercially available devices without, any messaging, around, what you can call these devices, or, without like tweaking what you can how you can elicit their attention, like using computer instead of Alexa or whatever. And so they were working with these 3 different devices. And so, which you can see here, so the Amazon Echo, the Google Home, and the Jibo, which I think was one of the earlier iterations of this kind of a device. But I'll admit, I haven't heard much about that particular device for quite a few years at this point. But perhaps, they're just a fair bit more popular than I thought. And to be fair, it always did have a few interesting capabilities above and beyond the other 2 devices, like being able to have that little head thing on top pivot and like take pictures and follow you and stuff. Kind of cool. But anyway, so these are the 3 devices, and in the first study that they conducted, again, was just to get a sense of how it is that people sort of naturally interact with the sort of factory settings of these devices. And so it was fundamentally exploratory, right? They just wanted to get a sense of the baseline, right? Their assumption going into that study was that as the devices become more socially embodied, right, as you go from device to device, people would be more likely to interact with the devices. And they also expected that people would actually tend to perceive the devices differently, depending on how socially embodied these devices were, like how anthropomorphized they were, right? Which I suspect is why they included that Jibo device, given that it looks like a cute little robot out of like a Pixar animated movie or something like that. Also, however, one of the named authors is quite literally a member of the Jibo team. So that certainly plays a role, I would imagine, in the inclusion of this device, but I do think it's fair to acknowledge that the Jibo device makes that team is making a fairly overt effort to create a device that's a bit closer to something like a pet, right? Or something like a pet, rather than just like a totally inanimate speaker column or whatever, like the Amazon or Google devices. So, it's unsurprising that they would include a device like this one in a study like this. And, particularly since I imagine they were hoping to get, that team might be hoping to get acquired by the 2 corporate behemoths that produce these other 2 devices, involved in the study. But anyways, all right, so that was the first study. Get a sense of how it is, just a baseline that people tend to interact with these devices. Second study. They messed around with the sort of summoning words, right? So instead of using Alexa or Jibo or whatever, they changed it to like, hey Amazon or hey Google. The goal of which being to emphasize the role and the presence of the sort of companies themselves rather than just the devices, right? And so in other words, diminishing how anthropomorphized the devices might be just intuitively, right? And their hypothesis, which is probably fairly obvious, is that, emphasizing the companies rather than, a kind of like unique identity for the devices would alter the ways by which families interacted with the devices. And so they had a few other hypotheses, but that was the main point. All right, so that was the second study. So the third study, they really pushed the gas pedal, to the metal on making the devices more sort of socially intuitive, using the wake words that tended to be the most social, and emphasize some of the uniquely social aspects of the devices. So, for example, the Jibo device quite literally like turns its face toward whomever has uttered the wake words, right? And they also used the Amazon Echo Show. It's not this particular device, but I guess the Amazon Echo Show has like a screen rather than just being like a cylindrical speaker like this one, along with another Amazon device that has a different screen, right? So, whatever it was that they found to be the most socially embodied wake words, those are the wake words on which they focused for this third study to get a sense of like whether just the act of saying those words when summoning the device has an effect. Okay, so that was the third of the 3 studies. And so I think it's worth keeping in mind that they were specifically focused on family interactions, right? And they did so because, according to them, the devices are mainly marketed for the home, right? And they then refer to some of the prior studies that they did, like right here, quote, "Our previous analysis demonstrated that there were higher amounts of reciprocal behavior, building off of social exchange behaviors, with more socially embodied agents that suggest that group members are influenced by other group members in their interactions and perhaps their perception of the agent." Meaning, if you're living, with several other people, right, and one of the other people tends to interact with the device in any given way, any unique way, then perhaps you're more likely to adopt the ways that they interact with the devices, right? Makes sense. It's just sort of that kind of dynamic exists in workplaces, in schools, sports teams in general, right? Like a culture. If you're part of a group and most of the members of the group tend to behave in certain ways, you're just going to be more likely to assume those behaviors, particularly if the sort of senior members of the team or family, the parents, behave in certain ways, right? And it's also important to keep in mind that they were using the speed dating format. Like, that's not just like a cute idea for their title. So, it's not like these families were like actually living with these devices, for weeks or months at a time. And, we all probably know what speed dating looks like or looked like. I don't even know if that kind of thing actually still goes on, or if it was like one of those vestiges of like past generations, but evidently there's quite literally a speed dating group here in Philly. So evidently it still goes on. This is a picture from like the top of the Eventbrite thing or whatever. But anyway, so the concept is that people who are interested in meeting someone for the specific purpose of dating all converge on one specific venue, like you can again see here, like a bar or a cocktail bar or a hotel conference room or something, whatever, and then spend a pretty short period of time having conversations with like a whole bunch of people in rapid succession, right? And so past groups have developed a speed dating experimental model to get a sense of how people or groups of people will initially interact with some form of technology, right? So, enabling multiple, technologies to be tested in rapid succession very efficiently, right? And, just to be clear, that this isn't quite as simple as just like setting up a normal human speed dating event in like a bar or something. So the past groups integrated like a whole like scene, almost like a movie set, to sort of simulate specific environments, which you can see here. So this is a scene from the paper. It was from 2017 that actually developed the whole speed dating experimental model. And they're clearly trying to like simulate a fully grown adult bedroom. No, I mean obviously this is supposed to be like an adolescent's or a teen's bedroom, perhaps a boy's. And say what you will about how accurate it may or may not be. When I was growing up in Miami, going to high school, I have to say that at least some of my friends did have rooms that were sort of similar to this, except for the Avatar movie poster. I find it difficult to believe that any of my friends, even the ones who would put like a big Ferrari thingy above their bed, would have an Avatar poster on their wall. But anyways, obviously, the point here is to like simulate environments that are at least somewhat reminiscent of the types of environments in which, various kinds of technology would be used. And so each family had a kind of like worksheet, okay, which laid out 24 different interactions that they were to complete in these sort of, movie set kind of environments. And so you can see that here. So they went through all of those actions with each of the devices. And then after that, they were free to basically do whatever they wanted with the devices. And like a good paper, the researchers provided some videos of this free play, which we'll check out for a sec. So, you can see there's different families that'll go through these different basically you can sort of see that the workshop at the top of that last image I showed, in front of the family and kids, you can see it sort of at the side of the table right there, like they have it right there. And so it's pretty clear that, these people weren't necessarily super familiar with these devices, which I frankly see as both an advantage and a disadvantage. But you can sort of get a sense of the experience here, right? Like the reactions of these kids is kind of funny. She's like, yeah. But so, they went through like a whole bunch of, subsequent interactions after doing the worksheet. And they were all asked, afterwards, they were all asked to answer various questions about the devices, right? Basically like a set of questions that were a scale of 1 to 7, offering options like, for the kids, like, no, as opposed to like strongly disagree. And so, just for the kids, right? Okay, so in addition to those responses, the team was also scoring the literal physical reactions of the participants throughout the reactions, right, throughout their interactions. And so, things like when the study participants waved, right? Keep in mind, there were some kids involved in this study. Like just a few months ago, my daughter would wave at a butterfly or like say hello to a butterfly, or, the researchers would track if participants followed up after the, electronic device gave a response, right, without any need to. And so, or if they just sustained a kind of dialogue with the device. And so the researchers measured more than just that, including like how family members who were from different generations tended to respond, kind of interesting. But I think you get the point, right? They were just doing what they could to measure just how like socially intuitive these devices became under various circumstances given their different characteristics. And so here's what they found. So first, when they changed the wake words to exclusively include the names of companies that make the devices, rather than any kind of like unique name associated with the device themselves, like Alexa or Siri or whatever, the participants tended to trust Google more so than Amazon. And there was also a change in their perception of the device. And so as one of the authors of the study said, quote, "It also drastically changed how much people thought the Amazon device was competent or like a companion. I was not expecting it to have that big of a difference between the first and second study. We didn't change any of the abilities, how they function, or how they respond. Just the fact that they were aware that the device was made by Amazon made a huge difference in their perception." End of the quote. It's kind of cool. Like I'm honestly not sure what my hypothesis going in would have been, but maybe it's unsurprising that divorcing the sort of universally known behemoth companies from like a tiny little device that can sometimes even look pretty cute, that can do things at your request, right? These devices, it might imbue it with a bit more or less friendliness than just interacting with the, behemoths themselves, right? Or I guess, I'm not exactly shocked by these results, I suppose. But the sort of central point of the study is that families will generally perceive that, one of these devices is a more anthropomorphic, more like a human, if the device, exhibits a variety of social cues, right? Regardless of the fact that those social cues are entirely artificial and entirely synthetic, there is no consciousness there. And so I have to be honest, like given the results of this study, it does seem at least a bit like a pitch from Jibo to, Amazon and Google to acquire Jibo because, hey, people found our device to be the most human, which they did. I can't help but acknowledge that. But, irrespective of, those aspects of the study, or of a study like this, I do think it's fair to suggest that we're all going to be engaging technologies like these in more and more socially intuitive ways, right? That these technologies are going to involve themselves in more and more of our lives, gradually, casually, but increasingly. And so this study strikes me as not only like pretty interesting, because let's be honest, this is fundamentally a dynamic by which products that are produced by some of the most gigantic companies in the world, quite literally the largest companies in human history, producing products that are more or less capable of just casually integrating into the most personal and intimate aspects of human life, right? Family interactions. And I'll also be honest, like this study seems to describe precisely what's happened in the McLaughlin household here in Philly. And I'm most certainly quite sensitive to this dynamic occurring, right? I'm not exactly supportive of it happening, to be totally clear, but it's happening anyways. And so I'll give you a very personal example. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I'm trying to get her to ask for things politely, right? You know what I mean, right? Like instead of saying, "Give me that apple," I'm trying to get her to say, "May I have that apple, please?" And then of course, when she inevitably gets the apple, no matter what she says, I'm trying to get her, into the practice of saying thank you afterwards, right? And we made some serious progress on that, by the way. But it occurred to me that, when I essentially demand that our voice-activated device turn on the lights with my daughter just standing there next to me, and I just say like, turn lights on, and the lights magically turn on immediately. That, in any normal human interaction, I'd expect my children to say thank you, right? If a human had done something like that after they requested. And so, my daughter's like adorably very good at this, right? But I've realized that I honestly have very little insight regarding what it's like to grow up with the various devices and the internet and technology in general being as sophisticated as it is today, right? That it's all just sort of totally normal to have technology as advanced as it is today, right? Let alone what it'll be like in another generation, right? Where you can just get an answer from Siri within, shorter than just a couple seconds. Like, it's kind of hard to grok. And I'm technically pretty old. I grew up to the wild sounds, the beeps and bops and like crunchy sounds of dial-up internet. When AOL Instant Messenger came out, I cared deeply about what my away message was going to be. I spent hours chatting with my friends and was, deeply disturbed when someone in the house decided to pick up the phone to do something that actually mattered, right? Which, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, immediately kicked me off the internet, right? Just if somebody picked up the phone. So I'm that old, okay? And it occurs to me that, when my daughter's, going through adolescence, all these kinds of social courtesies are particularly important because she'll be interacting with adults, who expect those courtesies at that age, at that level of maturity. And so the differences between, expressing these courtesies towards other people versus technological assistants or entities by that point may begin to collapse pretty rapidly, particularly as those technological assistants become more and more sophisticated, right? And so all this to say, I'll admit, I've started saying thank you after our technological assistant device successfully illuminates the lights in one of our rooms, Or on similar note, when the Apple Assistant, I don't want to activate it for you, I hope I didn't already several times, when that entity made by Apple on my phone answers a quick question, we have, pretty miraculously, like I have to say, I express my appreciation, even though I know it's quite literally pointless, right? I'm not hurting anybody's feelings by not saying thank you. And, while it's intentional in some cases, I'll admit to it being fairly natural at this point in some cases as well. And so, regardless, it's pointless apart from just being a demonstration of how I expect her to behave when humans provide responses that are similar to what the electronic devices provide, right? And, from the perspective of a developing Homo sapien, she's really just observing verbal interactions in the context of cause and effect, right? She understands sentence structure. She understands requesting something and receiving something and expressing gratitude. That's what she's seeing. And so as a result, I've just decided that it's just too discordant, right, for me to instruct her to say thank you and please in essentially every single situation, but then see me not do it when some voice, like a voice from her grandparents on an iPad that she's not looking at, like she just hears the voice. When someone appears to like turn all the lights on, immediately after I ask this entity to do so, And so, by the way, as I say, she understands sentence structure and cause and effect, right? Well, she's also figured out that she can ask our device to do certain things, right? And so I'm not exactly thrilled with the prospect of my 3-year-old being in control of all the lights of one of our rooms, but that's the world in which we live, right? And so anyways, I illustrate in painful detail, I'm sure, my own family experience with these devices because all of this, it hits quite close to home, right? Quite literally close to home. And so, this particular instance of me thanking an entirely artificial and synthetic and most certainly not conscious and, electronic entity is a state of affairs that absolutely wouldn't have come to my mind, right, prior to having kids and happening to be the recipient of one of these devices that I likely never would have purchased on my own. And so, it's just not a scenario that I would have imagined. Me essentially like modeling an unnecessarily courteous interaction with what is fundamentally a search engine that has access to my lights, right? And let's be honest, like this isn't exactly a groundbreaking study, right? This is pretty simple stuff. In fact, I suspect the people who are reading this, this study the most closely are the people who work at Amazon or Google or Jibo or Apple or whatever, realizing that there is likely some benefit to, investing in integrating these features that unnecessarily mimic human vocal eccentricities and like etiquette. And so, it's that aspect of being social primates, right? Of being Homo sapiens who live our lives dependent upon the interactions, the abilities, the kinships, relationships, and that just sort of fundamental fraternity that we have with other humans that these devices are tapping into, right, to sell more of them. And so, right, or perhaps exploiting those things. And so, we evolved to behave in this way. Parts of our central nervous systems are quite literally devoted to deciphering the intentions of other humans based on vocal intonations and expressions, facial expressions, and so on. And that's ultimately what this study is revealing, right? When completely artificial software is capable of emulating those basic features of human interactions, we're basically vulnerable to having it feel like it's equivalent to another human within our social circles. And so, I also paint this picture because I also think there's a bit of like a pernicious, maybe, component to how it is that we interact with this kind of technology. And so, therefore, the companies that create the technologies, right, we're interacting with the devices, but we're really interacting with the companies. And, in that, the technology sort of seeps into our families and lives, almost like by osmosis. It's like if the Geico Gecko or Ronald McDonald or whatever all of a sudden became like part of your family, right? And, all because, like, I don't want my daughter to develop a sense that she's not expected to express gratitude when anyone does something that she requests, whether she can see them or not, right? It's subtle. It's not something that I would have predicted. And it's, I think it's something that we all probably would benefit from contemplating a bit further, right? A bit more deeply than I suspect most of us have, because it's not like these devices are going to get worse at mimicking human idiosyncrasies, right? Or become worse at seeming more and more socially embodied and conscious, even while they have nothing, right? Even approximating consciousness. Just something I think we ought to think about. All right, that's what I have for you today. If you dig this kind of discussion, maybe you'll consider subscribing and liking and pressing all those helpful artificial buttons. Otherwise, I will see you on another Sunday. Hey, Scott, I'm glad you could catch it. I'm not particularly on board with big tech gaining access to every facet of my life, but I do think a Jarvis like Tony Stark would be sweet. Yeah, I mean, and it is very useful to be able to like turn on. We only have this system in one of our rooms, but it's the kind of room where there's a bunch of lights in different areas, and it's just like I'd have to spend a good minute or so like going, I don't know, about a full minute, but it's just like a pain in the butt when you have this 3-year-old daughter who's like screaming, I need to go to the potty, like you can just turn it all on like magic. I mean, it is cool. And so, okay, on the rare occasion I ask my phone something, I'm always polite and say please and thank you, right? When it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, I cuss it out in the way yes, I totally do that too. I get like irrationally like scornful, I guess. I'm just like, no, that's not what I wanted. Like, or like when it just like brings up a search, page, like it searches Google or whatever. I'm just like, thanks, I could have done that. I try to be nice to technology because I wanted to remember my courtesy when it inevitably takes over, right? And like, I think part of the way that we sort of talk about like artificial intelligence and just the progressive maturation of these technologies, I think a lot of us at least have it in our mind that it's just going to be like we have an artificial intelligence and now we live in that world. I think it's going to be a far more gradual process, and that gradualism is going to contribute to how casually it just increasingly integrates into the most personal aspects of our lives, like our relationships with our families, with our significant others, our children, right? And so yeah, I don't know, I could go on. I've already gone on long enough. Thanks everybody for watching. Maybe you'll consider liking and subscribing and all that. Otherwise, I will see you on another Sunday. Thanks for watching.